Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So I had a moment in a stream on another channel recently which changed my life forever. You guys ever have a thought that once you have it, it can't be unthought? It's just there forever. And as much as you may or may not want things to be as they were before, it can't. It's different now. So the person who said this was the Hidden Island. Hidden Island is an awesome One Piece YouTuber. Links in the description. Very entertaining. Also did a charity stream for cancer with him, which he hosted and was incredible. But overall, great dude. Subscribe to him. But he said this to me. It changed my life. I wonder if it'll change yours. He said, Mihawk was a member of Shanks' crew. Now calm down, don't knee jerk, alright? Remember, give this a couple of weeks, couple of months, the thought won't go away. But let's expedite this process somewhat and take this theory to the very edges of the known tinfoil universe. All the while sort of explain it, why some things about it make sense, and just go all in. So let's just go all in. But of course, before we do that, remember to like, subscribe, click the bell, all that stuff. Watch all my other previous videos. Binge the whole Joeboy channel more than one time, okay? Can you do that for me? Let's begin. I think that this theory needs you to essentially disregard every knee-jerk, every intuitive thought that you've ever had about Mihawk. And at the same time, I wouldn't say that there's a smoking gun. There's nothing that says that this theory has to be true. It really just exists within the empty space, the possibility of what we don't know, and we don't know quite a lot. But ultimately, this is about weaving Mihawk and Shanks' stories together, so let's begin with Shanks. We know that Shanks was originally a member of Gold Roger's crew for most of his life. He did not travel with the Roger Pirates to Laugh-Tale because Buggy got sick, and after they returned and he had a conversation with Gold D. Roger, something apparently changed about his dreams and his motivations. There is a very clear before and after, which is absolutely important. Before the Roger Pirates actually made it to Laugh-Tale, Shanks promised Buggy that they would take a ship together and find the island themselves, but after Roger's execution, suddenly Shanks has changed his mind. But it's not as though he didn't want to be a pirate and didn't have things that he wanted to accomplish, it simply wasn't finding the One Piece. So Buggy and Shanks went their separate ways, and I presume from this moment forward, the red-haired pirates were born. Now after this, there's a huge gap between this moment and our next update. This comes around the time of Luffy's flashback, 12 years before the beginning of the story, 12 years after Roger's execution. Shanks has already acquired his crew, and we learn roughly from the film Red Movie that Shanks at this point already had a bounty of 1 billion, over 1 billion. It's actually somewhat fascinating to me. 12-year period of Shanks' rise as a famous pirate. And really, the only thing that we know about Shanks during this time was that he had some relationship with Dracula Mihawk. And it seems to me this highlights the importance of Mihawk within Shanks' story. Oda could have thrown around connections everywhere between the Big Mom Pirates and Kaido and the government and admirals, but nope, it's just Mihawk. A 12-year period, and only one connection has a lasting impact on the story. We know that Mihawk and Shanks had a legendary duel. But overall, we know about this famous duel because Mihawk is no longer interested in having another. The concluding moment was when Shanks sacrificed his arm for the future for Luffy. From this point forward, Mihawk has no interest in Shanks. But it's from all this that creates the impression, it's the reason why fans assume that Shanks and Mihawk once had a rivalry that mattered. But at the same time, there's elements of this that have never really fit for me, without introducing new concepts to the story that just don't seem to be there. Because of Mihawk's actions in the current timeline, his interest in finding a swordsman worthy of dueling him, it is assumed that Mihawk's primary motivation is about sword fighting, about being the best swordsman and being challenged. But does anyone on planet Earth really consider Shanks to be a swordsman? This is a rhetorical question, and it's probably a stupid one at that, because people actually do believe this, but this is an ongoing debate, right? Like, Shanks very clearly in the story right now has mastered hockey, top tier. He may actually be the strongest person in the verse over the last 10 years or so. But his hockey is to the point that his actual sword play, the sword fighting itself, matters very little. And I suppose this is the essence of what bothers me. The fact that Mihawk is considered the world's strongest swordsman when, as of the current portrayal in the story and adding up everything that we know, it is abundantly clear that Shanks is stronger without one. If Shanks was an equal with Mihawk in the past as a swordsman, and now is stronger than Mihawk even without his sword, Shanks is the strongest swordsman. I get that this is a hotly debated subject, but I think that everyone should at least have some sympathy that it is this detail alone, the fact that it seems like Shanks is stronger, that creates an incredible sense of convolutedness. In my opinion, this same debate over time has just emphasized how ridiculously stupid Zoro's dream actually is. Being the world's strongest swordsman is pointless if you can't defeat any opponent that you would need to defeat. You get some of the most absurd conversations possible where it's like, oh, well, Mihawk doesn't care about how strong somebody is. He's not fighting the strongest people in the verse. It's just how they use a sword that matters to him. And oh, by the way, they have to be actual swordsmen. You know, like the craft, the art of the sword, not simply somebody incredibly powerful who uses a sword like Big Mom. Shanks was his rival as a swordsman, with his dominant left hand. He lost this left hand. Suddenly, the swordplay element of the fight is not the same. Therefore, a reduel with Shanks doesn't make sense. Even though it's still very clear that Shanks is one of the strongest people that exist, period, and doesn't need his sword to be one of the strongest people that exist, period. But yeah, going back to Zoro, after Zoro lost to Mihawk, he exclaimed to Luffy, he promised, "I will never lose again." But along this journey, Zoro has fought other people that aren't swordsmen, not as Mihawk must define it. If Big Mom is not a swordsman, then King is not a swordsman. He is a strong fighter with a sword. It just feels as if the point is muddled. I guess I feel the impact of his dream is diminished significantly. I feel like this is an important point of clarification just simply because it's very obvious that Zoro, especially during the time skip as he became subservient and trained under Mihawk, he cares about the Strat crew. He wants to see the crew succeed and everyone accomplish their dreams. So Zoro himself wants something more than just being the world's strongest swordsman. Anyway, let's backtrack for one moment. I'm sure that there's going to be some people in the comments that say, well, we haven't actually seen Mihawk duel anybody legitimately, so who's to say that Mihawk isn't as strong as Shanks is right now, or at least very close? It's possible that Mihawk is not just Yonko level, but he is Shanks Yonko level. I use this term, which I know everybody is going to hate, but I mean, I seriously think that Shanks just bodied Kaido before Marineford, such that he arrived and Kaido did not, which you start to see a difference there. And of course, anything could change in the future of the story. Oda could write in a duel between Shanks and Mihawk as legitimate equals, and he has the power to do so. Unfortunately, all the details in the story don't seem to add up with that. As for an example, in Marineford, Mihawk seemed excited to see the difference between us and him. That is to say, the difference between everybody and Whitebeard. The line itself implies that Mihawk believes Whitebeard was stronger than everybody, including himself. So if Shanks is a contemporary of this person, and most likely the strongest person in the verse over the last 10 years or so, then it would be fair to assume that Shanks was also probably stronger than Mihawk. This was before Shanks demonstrated just unparalleled hockey, which should make any fight with him versus anybody that we know of right now unfair. But let's stop, okay? Full disclosure. I hate this conversation. We're 8 minutes into the video, and, you know, if I were actually watching this, I would be done. I would have already clicked away. I wonder how many of you feel the same. It's just unsatisfying. No matter what your opinion may be about the specifics, whether you agree with me or not, the whole concept of the world's strongest swordsman is tarnished. It's confusing, perhaps vague, and meaningless. And I wonder whether that's the point. So let's relate this back to our subject, Mihawk. He's a young man, and his dream is likely to become the world's strongest swordsman. And regardless of any technicalities, we know that Mihawk achieved this dream because that is the title that he holds today. But the question is he any happier for it? And the answer to this is a very definitive no. The moments in which Mihawk is not bored in the story are few and far between. I don't think that we can say that that man is happy. So with this being said, I find Mihawk's aspirations to be hollow. And in my opinion, this explains the state that we find Mihawk in. But all of this presupposes that Mihawk has actually achieved his dream. And that after 24 years, his dream has not changed. Because frankly, this is unusual. Remember, it's never enough. One journey concludes, another one begins. In most cases. even if the person has learned nothing. Likewise for someone like Mihawk, who I presume enjoys the challenge of combat, perhaps becoming the strongest swordsman was the desire that set him out to the sea. But once accomplished, you would expect Mihawk to aim even higher. Remember, the times in which Mihawk is not bored stand out in the story, and one such example is once again Marineford. Mihawk seemed eager to participate in the Battle of Marineford, one of the few times where, in the canon story, he actually performed his duties as a warlord. Mihawk was excited to see how strong Whitebeard actually was. And it begs a question. Why does the man who is literally fueled by combat never once challenge Whitebeard to a duel? How is it even possible for Mihawk to not know already how strong Whitebeard was? Especially as it is something that he is very clearly interested in knowing. And so guys, my answer to this, and hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense as we dig into it, my answer for this is because Mihawk does not have a crew. You can't fight a Yonko and their crew by yourself. I actually think that Oda is pretty explicit with this, with Zoro. Luffy helps him. Luffy and the entire crew, their aimless journey encountering random villains helps Zoro get stronger. Zoro needs the crew as much as the crew needs Zoro. He can't become the strongest without them. Some challenges would elude him without them. I actually believe that Mihawk would have challenged Whitebeard in the past had he had a crew, but that is not the case. So let's address another assumption that fans make. The idea that Mihawk has always been a lone wolf. You could say it's true, you could say you believe it, but we really do not know. However, I would argue it really only makes sense one way. Mihawk did not enter the Grand Line as the world's strongest swordsman, most likely. We see Mihawk is present for Gold Roger's execution. Maybe it excited him knowing that the sea would be flooded with incredibly strong fighters in which he could test his blade. But nobody survives the Grand Line on their own. Nobody. At least not until you've accumulated the experience of surviving the Grand Line and becoming a top tier. At that point, maybe. But we seem to have skipped Mihawk's journey, like he was just born the strongest. But you guys already know, right? Premise of the video, Mihawk, member of Shanks' crew. Yeah, that's what I think. Maybe he doesn't anymore, but at one point, Mihawk needed a pirate crew. And together they traveled, defeating opponents that stood in their way. All of them growing simultaneously, no different than what is occurring right now with the Stride Pirates. So, let's just establish this as like truth for now. Even if you don't believe it, let's just assume that, right? What happened? Well, I've already argued that Mihawk wanted to challenge Whitebeard. He wanted to know how strong Whitebeard was. And it's not because Whitebeard was a great swordsman that stood in his path of becoming the world's best. Mihawk is a lover of combat, period. I don't think that Mihawk avoids challenges just because the person does not wield a sword, or isn't the true definition of a swordsman. So he travels with Shanks, they conquer paradise, they move on to the New World, and what happens? Shanks' journey ends, well before Mihawk's. And then you have the most famous pirate trope, in my opinion, play out. Mutiny. Because I think Mihawk is actually a parallel of Zoro. Mihawk's story is much more similar than you ever thought. But while Zoro will get the good future, Mihawk got the bad one. You guys remember in Chapter 5 of One Piece what Zoro said to Luffy? He said, "If you ever stand in the way of my dreams, I'll be the one to kill you." And we speculated a lot about Zoro over the years in this channel, and quite frankly, the idea of a Zoro mutiny doesn't really make sense anymore, if for no other reason than time constraints of the story itself. But I want some of those lines and those clues that we picked up, I want them to matter, right? Things like in Water 7, where Zoro told Luffy, hey, if you continue acting like a fool, if you keep playing pirates, I'm going to be the one to leave the crew. He says it plants a thought in your brain, and so far nothing really has come from it. The trajectory, if we're being honest with ourselves, has actually been the opposite of everything that I've said in the past about this. Essentially, Zoro saying this to Luffy was wrong, because the messaging from this point forward is continue to be yourself, Luffy, because being you is what's ultimately going to be the king of the pirates. Zoro wants Luffy to take the New World more seriously, but in Wano, Luffy awakens his devil fruit, which literally makes him incapable of doing this. My impression of Zoro's growth since this moment in Water 7 is he's felt continuously over the story the growing pressure of the opposition that they have to face. If you'll notice in early One Piece, Zoro laughs quite frequently, he makes jokes. Now he's not quite the same character, he's so much more tense and serious. And we get some exploration of this conversation in Zou, where you get the impression Zoro does not want to make any mistakes because that could have a cascading effect on everybody. He literally tells Luffy to leave Sanji behind because of the consequences they would likely face having provoked Big Mom while in the midst of a conflict with Kaido. Literally everything that Zoro feared and anticipated occurred, and it didn't matter. All this has really accomplished is given Zoro more reason to trust and have faith in his captain and the decisions his captain makes. So with this being said, let's twist it. It wasn't that Oda had ever planned for Zoro and Luffy to fight. What instead he was doing was explaining the past, Shanks and Mihawk's past. At one point, Mihawk trusted Shanks to help him fulfill his own dream, and the dream of every single one of their crewmates. But on the precipice of doing so, Shanks stood in his way. And this was, in fact, the backstory of one of the most famous duels we have never seen. I hope you guys appreciate here that the very least that we've accomplished is we've added so many layers to the story that were not there prior, and frankly not a lot of people ever expect to be there. Right now, our general impression is that Mihawk just wanted to be the world's strongest swordsman, and Shanks was a swordsman, and they dueled, and that's the long and short of it. You get a contrived and confusing discussions in which people have very strong opinions, there's no real answers, and there's no real depth. Sorry if that's too blunt, but that is really how I feel. It makes you ask the real questions, like who's stronger. So whether this is thinking too much about it or not, I do really like it. Like, here's something to throw out into the abyss. Probably you've never heard anyone question ever. You know, what is it that Shanks' crew actually wants, or at one point in time wanted? The sea has a reward for everyone. That is the idea of the One Piece. It's everything you could possibly want wrapped into one thing, which is why literally everybody journeys for it. And at the same time, what is it? Well, nobody actually knows, so that they can believe it's literally anything. Haki is created from willpower. Willpower is created when you desire something. The Grand Line selects for those who have the strongest desires, the ones to rise to the top and become the best, have something that they actually want. So what did Shanks' crew actually want? Guys, would it shock you if it was revealed that Lucky Roo actually dreamt as a child to find the All Blue? Would it shock you if it was revealed that Yasopp wanted to be a part of the greatest pirate crew ever and be renowned as the greatest sharpshooter to have ever lived? Would it shock you that throughout their journey they all began to hope and believe that Shanks would be the one to change the world? Either way, I think that every single one of them wanted something. And I think that when Shanks entered the New World and established himself as a Yonko, all of their dreams were postponed or discarded. And the one responsible for making this decision was their captain, Shanks. Honestly, it excites me to talk about this outside of the context of Mihawk being a former red-haired pirate, simply because it adds so much to Shanks and his crew at the conclusion of this story. We like to think, well, Shanks bet everything on the future, and he believes in Luffy, and is striving to help Luffy. But maybe this moment was the moment his crew had always been waiting for. Because while Shanks may not believe in himself, or may not believe himself to be the person that Luffy is, why does his crew have to believe the same thing? Because they aren't just tools. They aren't just objects to be used subservient to Shanks' will. They, just like every other pirate, have dreams of their own. And maybe those dreams haven't been crushed quite yet. I love this because when the red-haired pirates show up in the story again, you know that what they're doing actually matters. It matters to them. And assuming this, we will see the very best version of the red-haired pirates. Just as strong as the moment that Shanks established himself as a Yonko. Simply stated, it isn't a crew of defeated has-beens. They're actual players. And they won't just let the Straw Hats win. even though that is precisely what the fans think will happen. A lot of people say that Zoro is the most loyal Straw Hat, but I think that this is objectively false. In my opinion, loyalty is defined by sticking with somebody no matter what happens. But Zoro would never do that, and he has said that. Now, this doesn't mean that being loyal makes you a good friend, right? Zoro's role is important. I mean, he potentially helps Luffy more than every other Straw Hat. I also think that earning Zoro's trust and respect is a greater feat than any other Straw Hat. Zoro is actually distrustful by nature. I think that Oda established this pretty clearly in the story through Nami and Robin. Back during Arlong Park, Zoro didn't trust Nami ever, and when she left, had no interest in getting her back. The same is true of Robin. Zoro was the last to accept Robin as a real crewmate. Maybe you could even apply this to Sanji as well. While the entire crew has faith that Sanji is an integral, irreplaceable member of the Straw Hats, Zoro clearly didn't. He didn't trust Sanji's eccentricities to not get them into trouble. And for this, he was willing to leave him behind. In a very similar way, he was also willing to leave Usopp behind. Like guys, there is a very clear pattern here, right? There's good and bad about this. There's things that you can discuss from it. There's things that you can love about it. Maybe Zoro cares more that everybody succeed than all of the other Straw Hats. And he cares so much that it allows him to hold the crew, every member, to a higher standard. And maybe this is vital for the Straw Hat crew to function. But the reality is that Zoro's trust is hardest to obtain. He is absolutely the least loyal. And it's for this reason that attaining this loyalty could be considered more rewarding. But essentially, guys, what I'm saying, the point of all this is I think that Zoro is much more similar to Mihawk than you realize. I believe that both began their adventures as lone wolves. And I believe that both managed to obtain a certain amount of reputation without the help of anybody else. I believe that both never really had any interest in joining a pirate crew. And I think the reason for this is that both are distrustful by nature. But I think ultimately both ended up joining a crew because they realized that in order for them to grow, they needed some amount of help. And I think that both went through the same story arc. Island to island, their trust, their faith, and their loyalty grew, to the point that their desires themselves changed, steadily becoming less about their individual ambitions and intertwining with the ambitions of everybody else. Or maybe you could say the adventure allowed everyone's ambitions to grow. And Mihawk was just like Zoro, always capable of leaving the crew, if he felt his captain was standing in his way. Basically, you guys think that Mihawk actually accomplished his dream, but I'm speculating here that he hasn't. Becoming the world's strongest swordsman might have been the reason that he set out to sea, but eventually it became part of a whole left unfulfilled. Guys, I'm saying that the Grand Line defeated Mihawk. And I actually think that there's a clue from the story which substantiates this. Was anybody confused when Mihawk joined the Cross-Guild pirate crew? A pirate crew that I would argue thematically is comprised of those who have had their dreams crushed. Buggy, Crocodile, and Mihawk. Oda chose these three because they are all the same. There is a connection between them. And likewise, Cross-Guild functions to rekindle these lost dreams. They had all given up hope, but that does not mean that that hope cannot return, which Oda establishes in an impassioned speech by Buggy. This is from chapter 1082. Kill me and be done with it if you like, but I gotta get this off my chest. You really call yourself pirates chasing after these small-time goals? Stop wasting your time with these lateral moves. Think back when you were young. What did you want to be? I could see that Shanks had so much promise ahead of him that I gave up on my dreams. But Shanks is actually on the move. Why after all of these years? Well, whether by fate or accident, I'm on the same level as him now. So if he's gonna do it, then I want to be the king of the pirates. Mihawk chimes in, do you actually believe you can talk us into this? No plan, no preparation. Pirating is a business. Red hair, Blackbeard, Straw Hat, you want us to fight all of them at once? All pirates went out to sea in search of this. Isn't that right, folks? Tell me, what was the dream that you took out to sea? Are your souls crying out for meaning, begging for a purpose when your lives could be cut short at any moment? Don't be cowards, soft and satisfied with the status quo. Reach out for what you want most of all. Straight up, guys, I think that this is an underappreciated moment in the story, and I think we're going to look back at it and be like, whoa. This was not just a speech to help Buggy rekindle what was lost. It wasn't just for all of their crew. This conversation was also meant for both Crocodile and Mihawk. And it implies that both Crocodile and Mihawk have given up on what it is that they truly want. I do not think that it is a coincidence that the concern that Mihawk voiced is the very same one that Zoro voiced to Luffy. Essentially, how can we possibly fight all of these people at the same time? But it tells you that Mihawk does not believe in himself, or does not believe that he possesses what he needs to really get what he wants. And if you're going to find a smoking gun, that there is more depth to Mihawk than meets the eye, this is it. Mihawk has always needed a crew. One strong enough and able enough to do what it is required so that Mihawk himself can aspire to something greater than a duel with Zoro. So what is it that really happened between Mihawk and Shanks? And why is it that after Shanks lost his arm, Mihawk lost all desire to duel him again? Straight up, guys, I don't think that Mihawk and Shanks' duel was about who is the world's strongest swordsman. I actually think that although Mihawk holds the title of world's strongest swordsman, he does not actually believe it. And I believe this because of one simple truth that we've already addressed in this video. Shanks is stronger than Mihawk, with one hand tied behind his back. Challenges allow characters in One Piece to grow. And this is something not yet expressed in the story, but the reason that Mihawk is eager for a challenge is because he feels like he still needs to grow. Essentially, Shanks stopped pursuing challenges. His adventure seemingly ended, and thus he was no longer fit to be Mihawk's captain. Mihawk, distrustful and solitary by nature, knew he would never be able to join another crew, so he was left with one singular choice: be capable enough to do it alone or fail. But he already knew that he couldn't do it alone. So his challenge to Shanks, their legendary duel, the prize for this fight was the title of captain of the red-haired pirates. And in my opinion at the time, this fight ended in a draw. Neither won, and the crew chose Shanks. And I think that from this moment to where we currently are, because Shanks had a crew and stayed in the Grand Line, and although didn't pursue something greater than being a Yonko was still challenged, Shanks grew beyond what Mihawk is today. Mihawk has essentially been stagnant. But fights aren't always about winning. This is expressed on several occasions throughout the story, but there's a certain kind of communication that occurs between honest combatants. And as Oda says about Luffy, the fight has a lot to do with changing his opponent's worldview. Even as you could potentially speculate, maybe it won't happen, but it could have happened, a Luffy and Zoro duel where Zoro says, "You're not fit to be captain. I will challenge you for the right to that title." It doesn't necessarily mean that that's actually what Zoro ever wanted, or would have ever believed himself capable of doing. The simple fact is that throughout the course of the journey and from the beginning, Zoro trusted Luffy to be the captain. Zoro needed Luffy to be the captain. Even if he hypothetically wins this duel, that's not really what he would want. What he would actually want is for Luffy to see the world as he does. So while Mihawk and Shanks' fight might have masqueraded as a challenge for captaincy of the red-haired pirates, the truth is that Mihawk really just wanted Shanks to continue to pursue his dreams. For his sake, for the crew's sake, and for Mihawk's sake. And ultimately, it is for this reason that Mihawk eventually gave up. Because when Shanks offered his arm for the future, it was the definitive moment, at least in Mihawk's eyes, that Shanks' adventure and the red-haired pirates' adventure was over. They had passed their wills on to the next, and thus a fight with them became pointless. And I actually think that Mihawk bought this so thoroughly that is actually what occurred between Mihawk, Zoro, and the Straw Hats in the Baratie. Mihawk intended to pass his will onto Zoro. But not just Zoro, the lone swordsman looking to become the world's strongest. Zoro as a member of a very promising pirate crew, capable of doing so much more than that. Guys, Mihawk has shown just as much interest in Luffy as he has Zoro, and I think this is because he sees a lot of Shanks in Luffy. I think that he appreciates the role that Luffy would have for Zoro. Mihawk made himself an obstacle for Zoro, essentially chosen as his prodigy. But I don't think that Mihawk actually believes that Zoro's journey ends with his own defeat. Back to the inherited will. There's something that Mihawk hasn't done. And maybe some of you guys will remember my old videos about Zoro and Buddhism, but I think that this is essentially a sin beyond the Deva path. There's a final level of sword mastery beyond which Mihawk has been able to obtain. He wants to see someone do it, and throughout the course of the story, he had lost hope that it could have been him. But for this, Luffy is as important as Zoro. Both are required. But remember Buggy's speech? Hopes rekindled? Guys, I want to end this theory with a bang, with the most wild speculation that you could possibly imagine. If you've been following along, you'll understand that I've changed the context of a Mihawk and Zoro duel quite significantly compared to probably what most fans were expecting. The general thought before this was that Mihawk was already the world's strongest swordsman, was simply bored and eager for challenges. Zoro was that challenge. Basically, Mihawk had a dream that he accomplished, and Zoro is simply the next generation. But here we've established a dream that Mihawk failed to accomplish and no longer believes that he can achieve. So Mihawk to Zoro is actually more similar to Luffy and Shanks. Shanks wants Luffy to accomplish what he cannot, and what he never did. But suddenly Shanks is on the move, and it has people wondering if Shanks really gave up. And suddenly we have Buggy's speech, and you wonder whether Mihawk has the nerve to try again. So rather than Mihawk being an accomplished man, fading into the sunset, encouraging another to follow in his footsteps, maybe instead Zoro stands in the way and is himself an obstacle for the ultimate treasure. Of course, there will be stakes in this kind of fight between Mihawk and Zoro. For one, your life. The duel will be life or death. Winner takes all. But just because one or the other might win the duel does not mean that the dream is actually accomplished. That's the whole point of an adventure. You never know when it may end. You don't even know if it is even possible. I encourage everybody to reread the Barate arc once again, the fight of Zoro and Mihawk. But from the context of this video, I think it adds more to it, quite frankly. As you see Mihawk impressed with Zoro, I think it sheds light on why. Mihawk seems absolutely confused that Zoro would keep fighting even when he should know that he will lose. Zoro says that he would prefer death rather than defeat. The reason that Mihawk is confused is because Mihawk stopped fighting when he thought that he would lose. Mihawk actually chose defeat over death, and this defeat was the result of losing his pirate crew. Without them, there was no reason to continue. He had no chance of victory. Another step forward would have surely meant death. So I find it interesting, after Mihawk defeats Zoro first, he requests that Zoro surpass him. But then he asks Luffy a question. What is your goal? And Luffy responds, to be king of the pirates. Mihawk says, you tread a perilous path, even more perilous than trying to surpass me. And as Mihawk listens, Zoro states that he will never allow himself to lose again. Luffy requires the world's greatest swordsman, and Zoro won't disappoint him. Through this is one of the few times that we've seen Mihawk smile, and his comment is, they make a good team. And I suppose that you guys pretty much understand now why this comment makes a lot more sense. Mihawk, possibly more than anyone else, understands the value of that team. And by saying it, it straight up implies that Mihawk is probably missing something vital. So I'm going to make a wildly unpopular speculation here, and I'm curious as to what you guys actually think about this, but I wanted to make sure that I argued it in full. Chapter 6 is where Zoro expresses his dream to become the world's strongest swordsman and for his name to reach up into the heavens. He says, Luffy, if you stand in my way, I will kill you. And Luffy says this, the world's greatest swordsman, that's great. And it's fitting because I'm going to be king of the pirates. And anything less than that would make me look bad. Essentially, Luffy requires the world's strongest swordsman. Guys, regardless of Buggy's impassioned speech, I don't believe that Mihawk actually believes Buggy to be the person that will help him one day achieve his goal. Even though Buggy may be the person to re-inspire that desire, that hope, to pursue it. Does that make sense? Mihawk will never ever trust and respect Buggy as his captain. But I think that he knows that he needs one. Mihawk has kept a very careful and close eye on Straw Hat Luffy throughout the journey. And I'm certain that Mihawk at least knows something of the reason why Shanks bet his arm for the future, which is Luffy. And Luffy is definitely going to become the king of the pirates. And Luffy is definitely going to need the world's strongest swordsman on his side. So let's foil and parallel some stuff. A lot of people wonder if the Davy Back fight is going to come back into the story. Maybe it will. But what I'm going to speculate here is essentially the reverse of a Davy Back fight. Adding stakes to Mihawk and Zoro's duel. If Mihawk wins, he replaces Zoro as a member of the Straw Hat crew. Luffy must agree to these terms because he made a promise. Nothing less than the world's strongest swordsman is deserving of being on his crew. And in this, we have conjured out of the ether a magnificent parallel. Mihawk fights Shanks for red hair captaincy. The loser leaves the crew. But this fight was always self-defeating, because Mihawk already knew that he probably wouldn't have been a capable captain. So really, all this moment established was that Mihawk chose wrong. Shanks was never the captain that he was looking for. And now, potentially, Mihawk fights Zoro. And the prize essentially is Luffy. Anyway guys, this ended up a lot longer than I had hoped that it would be. At the same time, I think all of this is fire. And whether you agree or not, certainly doing what we always do, right? Making brain cells fire. I'm curious as to your thoughts about this, anything that's on your mind. But if you guys really enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe, right? More coming. Even if we don't make as many theory videos or videos in general as other channels. On that same note, if you enjoyed this theory character analysis, the depth, right or wrong, check out The Booms, the book that I wrote. Or books plural. You can analyze it in the same way if you want to. I literally did that on purpose because that is what I enjoy from One Piece. Volume 3 will be out on October 4th. It puts the cherry on the top of the arc, which is volumes 1 through 3. Put them all together. One complete story should be fulfilling. But yeah guys, leave a comment, like the video, dislike the video. Just generally let me know what you think about it. And as always, have a wonderful day.